Hello everyone, I welcome you all to today's paper discussion. So today we are going to discuss open mock test paper 1. So here we are dealing with the chemistry part, and we know the paper is interesting. Some questions are a bit tricky, some are lengthy, but in overall it is just like what you see in your advanced paper or a somewhat upper level to that. So let's begin the discussion. We have been given 3 structures. So the question says, consider the following structures and identify the incorrect statement. Now here in these structures we have been given certain bond angles and we have to compare these bond angles. Now if you see, in the first structure we have been given a carbon-carbon double bond, and to one carbon we have 2 methyl groups and to the other carbon we have 2 hydrogen atoms. Now if I talk about the bond angles here, then what we have? We have sp2 hybridized carbon here. Now if this is sp2 hybridized, then the ideal bond angle is around 120. But because of this double bond, there is greater repulsion between this double bond and single bond as compared to single bond. And because of that I can say one thing, that my theta 1, this is theta 2, that my theta 1 is greater than theta 2, or you can say that theta 1 is slightly greater than 120 degree, and similarly theta 2 is slightly lesser than 120 degree. The theta 1 is somewhere around 122.2. Now the second structure is COCl2. Now in COCl2 again the hybridization of carbon is sp2, and here you can see the bond that we have to look for is theta 3. This is the angle. Now here again we have a carbon oxygen double bond and a carbon chlorine single bond, and again the double bond single bond repulsion is greater than my single bond repulsion. And if you look at the last structure, here we have a sp3d hybridized sulfur atom, and you can see that the wedge and dash are in the equatorial position, whereas the solid sulfur fluorine bonds are in axial position. So if I draw it here, we have sulfur, these are fluorine atoms which are in the axial position, and these dash and wedge are in the equatorial positions. And we have been given 2 bond angles here, one is theta 5 and theta 4. So this one is theta 4 and this one is theta 5. Now again, applying the same concept of VSEPR, we can say that theta 5 is greater than theta 4 and theta 1 is greater than theta 2. Now let's look at the options. My first option says that theta 1 is greater than theta 2. Yes, this is correct statement. Second statement is theta 3 is greater than theta 1. We will talk about this later because we do not know the relationship between these two. Third is theta 5 is greater than theta 4. Yes, we have seen that the double bond single bond repulsion is greater than single bond repulsion. So yes, third statement is correct. And theta 2 is lesser than 120. Yes, this statement is also correct. So we are left with only one statement, that is theta 3 is greater than theta 1. So it means this statement must be incorrect. And also if we talk about the bond angle, then the bond angle in COCl2 is somewhere around 111. So from there we can say that according to the question, my correct statement is B, which is incorrect statement. So the answer of this question is option B. Now moving on to my next question. Next question says a pure enantiomer with molecular formula C5H9OCl. Now here if we calculate the DBE or the double bond equivalent, then you can see that DBE here is 1. It means either there is carbon-carbon double bond or a carbon oxygen double bond is there, or a ring is there, and it says that the compound is a pure enantiomer. Now if this is a pure enantiomer, it means my compound is optically active. And this on treatment with S2PDBSO4, here we are treating it with Lindlar catalyst, gives a compound X. Now Lindlar catalyst does not work on alkenes, it means it is not alkene. Also my Lindlar catalyst does not work on ring compounds, but it attacks on acid halide and form aldehyde. So that is one of the possibility, but we have to confirm it. Now the question says X gives 2,4-DNP test. So yes, 2,4-DNP test is for carbonyl compounds. It means I have either an aldehydic group or a ketonic group in my compound. And X on treatment with NaBH4 ethanol gives Y. Now NaBH4 ethanol attacks on your aldehyde or ketone or acid halide, and compound Y on treatment with dilute H2SO4 gives Z. So let's talk about each and every compound. So first is we have C5H9OCl, which on treatment with S2PDBSO4 gives X. So here I have C5H9OCl, and on reacting with S2PDBSO4, it is giving me a compound which gives positive test with 2,4-DNP. It means I am getting an aldehydic group from this. So from here I can say one thing, that this is basically an acid halide which is giving an aldehyde. But now I want to know that to which group it is attached to. But here we have one additional information, that it is a pure enantiomer. It means my initial compound is optically active, and if I want to draw an optically active compound with these carbon, hydrogen, oxygen and chlorine atoms, I have COCl, which is at the terminal. Let's put one carbon atom here. Now if I want to be optically active, let's say one methyl is attached here, and the only possibility is that we have an ethyl group. If I try to draw any other structure, we have one H here. So for example, if you try to make any other structure from this, like a straight chain, you will not get an optically active compound. If you do the branching, then also you will not get an optically active compound. So my this structure is determined. Now after that, it is attacked by NaBH4 and ethanol. So yes, NaBH4 ethanol makes an alcohol. So this is C2H5CH2OH. Now this compound basically reacts with dilute H2SO4 and it forms a compound Z, which is an isomer of Y. Now if I react this compound with the dilute H2SO4, what will happen? This is Y basically, and this is X. Now on reaction with dilute H2SO4, this OH takes H plus, this will be lost. There is 1,2 hydride shift, and finally I will get a carbocation like this. And on this carbocation, finally my water will attack, and we obtain CH3, C2H5, CH3. There is one carbon here, there is one oxygen here, and this C2H5 is attached on this carbon, and there is one CH3 here also. And you can see that your Z and Y are isomers of each other, both are having same molecular formula, only difference is the position of my OH group. So the options are here. X has only one chiral center. Yes, X has only one chiral center. We have seen that. Molecular formula of Y is C5H12O. So this is Y is C5H12O. Yes, the DBE is 0. Then next is when Y is treated with copper gauze at 600 Kelvin, it gives this compound. Now copper at 600 degrees Celsius behaves as an oxidizing agent. Now it behaves as an oxidizing agent. It oxidizes Y to an aldehyde. If it is a secondary OH group, it oxidizes it to ketone, and if it is tertiary, then there is dehydration. There is no oxidation to any ketonic or carboxylic group. And option D says that when Z is heated with copper gauze, it gives an aldehyde. No, Z is a tertiary alcohol, and tertiary alcohol on reaction with copper at 600 Kelvin gives an alkene. So D statement here is incorrect, and we have to select the incorrect statement. So answer is D. Now here we have question number 21. Now in question number 21 we have been given a metal belonging to 3D series. In its +2 oxidation state forms an octahedral diamagnetic complex. See, these words are very important. First thing, that the geometry is octahedral and it is diamagnetic with a bidentate ligand AA2- and the complex is represented as Ma3/4-. So here we can see that the oxidation state of M is +2 and that is given to us. Okay. Considering crystal field theory, the electronic configuration of the M2+ ion in the complexes. Now we have to see that what is the configuration of the electrons that are filled in 3D 4s and 4p orbital of a 3D series element having oxidation state +2. Now here we have to apply CFT, and in CFT what we know is that I have 5 degenerate orbitals. So here in my D subshell I have 5 degenerate orbitals if no ligand is present, and when ligands come with the symmetric field, then what happens? That the energy is raised and still these are degenerate in nature. But what happens when there is no symmetry? It means the ligands are coming from different directions. For example, let's say I have octahedral complex. In that, 2 ligands are coming from the axial positions and 4 are coming from the equatorial position. So because of the different ligand environment, what happens? That there is further splitting and my 5d orbitals are splitted into 3 and 2. Okay. These are in my octahedral environment. These are, we call it T2G, which are dxy, dyz and dxz, whereas these are dx square minus y square and dz square. Now we have to fill the electrons. Now in the question you can see that in total in all the options we have 2 + 2 + 2 6 electrons, 6. In C option also 2 + 2 + 2 6 electrons. It means the total number of d electrons I have is 6. It's only the way in which we fill the electrons in these orbitals. Now +2 oxidation state, and it is diamagnetic. It means the pairing has happened, and if pairing has happened, you can say that here the element for which we are talking about is iron, because iron is 3d6 4s2, and in +2 oxidation state I can write iron in the form as 3d6 4s0, and when we have a strong field ligand, then pairing happens and we get a diamagnetic complex. So first the electrons are filled in lower energy orbitals, then to the higher energy orbitals. So I have to fill here 1 2 3 4 5 6. So all these 6 electrons are filled in my T2G orbitals, that is dxy, dyz and dxz, whereas the above 2 orbitals remains empty. So let's check which option depicts this. So first is dxy2 dx square minus y square 2. No, this cannot be the option. Then we have dxy contains 2 electrons, dyz contains 2 electrons, 3dxz contains 2. Yes, it seems that this option is correct. Let's look at the other options also. Here we have electrons in dz square and dx square minus y square. No, this is incorrect. And similarly, here 1 electrons are not filled. First, there is complete filling of electrons in lower energy orbital and then to the higher energy orbital. So again, this statement is incorrect. So the correct answer of this question is option B. Now moving on to next question, it says, consider the following molecules, that is silver fluoride, silver chloride, ferric chloride and sodium chloride, and identify the incorrect statement. Now here we have been given 4 statements. We have to select the incorrect one. My first statement says AgF is soluble in water and AgCl is soluble in ammonia aqueous. Yes, AgF is soluble, whereas other silver halides, that is AgCl, AgBr and AgI, these are insoluble because of the high polarizing power of Ag plus and greater polarizability of my bigger anions like chloride, bromide and iodide, and because of that these are insoluble in water. But AgCl is soluble in ammonia. The reason is that silver forms a complex AgNH3 twice plus, and because of the formation of this complex, silver chloride becomes soluble in ammonia aqueous. So this statement is correct. This will not be the answer. Ferric chloride is soluble in ether. Yes, it is soluble in ether. Polar aprotic solvents, ferric chloride is soluble. So yes, this is correct. And NaCl is insoluble in ether. Yes, NaCl is soluble in polar protic solvents, or you can say like dissolves like. The one which has higher polarizing power, which can solvate my NaCl, will dissolve it. So yes, this statement is also correct. It is insoluble in ether. AgF is less covalent than AgCl. Now here we have to look for our Fazan's rule. Now Fazan's rule, what did it say? It says that the covalent character in any ionic compound is basically determined by 5 factors. What are those factors? First is the radius of cation. If the radius of cation is smaller, then it has higher polarizing power and covalent character is high and ionic character is low. Second is the radius of an ion. If the radius of an ion is higher, then there will be larger polarizability and similarly it leads to high covalent character. Third is the charge on my cation or charge on my anion. If any of these quantities is higher, the greater polarizing power as well as the greater polarizability, and it leads to higher covalent character. And last is the pseudo noble gas configuration. Now if we have pseudo noble gas configuration, then also they have higher polarizing power than noble gas configuration elements, and that's why greater covalent character. Now here we are comparing AgF and AgCl. Now in AgF and AgCl, Ag plus is same in both the cases. It means we have to do this question with the help of my anion. And here we have fluoride and chloride. Which will have higher polarizing power? Obviously the bigger one. And here the bigger one is chloride ion. So chloride will have higher polarizability, so it has higher covalent character. So AgCl is more covalent, whereas AgF is not that covalent, and that is the reason of its solubility in water. So if you see here, AgF is less covalent than AgCl. Yes, AgF is less covalent than AgCl. This statement is correct. And last is AgCl is more soluble than AgF in water. No, we have seen in the previous option that AgCl is more covalent, and if AgCl is more covalent, it means it is more soluble in non-polar solvents, whereas it is less soluble in polar solvents like water. Whereas AgF, being less covalent, is more soluble in water. So the last statement is incorrect, and this will be the answer of my question. So yes, the correct option is D. Now moving on to my next question, consider a hexagonal unit cell as shown in the following figure. Atoms forming HCP are labeled with numbers and all are identical atoms. Identify the incorrect statement. Now here we have been given a figure, that is HCP lattice, in which atoms are present at the corners and these three atoms are present inside. Basically they are forming the HCP lattice, that is AB type lattice. Now in this AB type lattice we have been asked few statements and we have to go for the incorrect one. Just remember this, they will do this intentionally, they will write their incorrect and you have to see for that. So first statement is atoms numbered with 7, 8, 9 and 10 will form a tetrahedral void. Now tetrahedral void is formed when I have three atoms like this and one atom is above this. So the type of void that is formed here is basically a tetrahedral void. And octahedral void is formed when, just assume that I have three atoms like this which are touching each other, and then we have three more atoms like this in a second layer and they are touching each other. So the void that is formed here is basically an octahedral void, whereas this one is tetrahedral void. Now here you have to look for such type of formations. So here in option 1 we have atoms numbered with 7, 8, 9 and 10 will form a tetrahedral void. So this is 7, 8, 9 and 10. Now if you look at this in 3 dimension, it looks like that it is forming a tetrahedral void. So yes, this statement is correct, but this will not be the answer. Then atoms numbered with 7, 2, 3 and 9. 7, 2, 3 and 9. Yes, this is also a tetrahedral void. See, in HCP, if I look for, then this 7 is forming a tetrahedral void with 8, 9 and 10. 7 is forming a tetrahedral void with 8, 9 and 10. Similarly, this 7 dash is also forming the tetrahedral void with 8, 9 and 10. So from here I get 2 tetrahedral voids. Similarly, each of these 8, 9 and 10 are forming the tetrahedral voids with the upper atoms as well as the lower ones. For example, if I talk about 9, it is forming a tetrahedral void with 7, 2 and 3. If we talk about 10, it is forming tetrahedral void with 7, 5 and 4. And similarly 8 is forming tetrahedral void with 7, 1 and 6. And similarly, if you look at the lower atoms, they are also forming tetrahedral voids. So from there we will get 3 above and 3 below, a total of 6 tetrahedral voids plus 2 here. It means 6 these, 2 these. So in total we get 8 tetrahedral voids which are completely inside. And we have 4 more tetrahedral voids which are present on the edges. But if you look at closely, above a tetrahedral void you will find only a tetrahedral void. For example, here we have a tetrahedral void. And here also in the line connecting these, we have a tetrahedral void. And similarly with 8 and 1 dash, 6 dash and 7 dash, we have a tetrahedral void here. So again these two are present on the line connecting them. But between these two tetrahedral voids there are no octahedral voids. Similarly, we look for octahedral. For example, just take any 3 atoms above and any 3 atoms below, then you get an octahedral void, and above and below octahedral you will not find any tetrahedral void. Now let's look at the options. First option, we have seen this is correct statement, but we have to look for incorrect. So this is not the answer. Then atoms numbered with 7, 2, 3 and 9 forming a tetrahedral void. Yes, they are forming a tetrahedral void. There will be an octahedral void just above the tetrahedral void. We have just seen this case, that above a tetrahedral void we are finding a tetrahedral void only. So this statement is incorrect. And last statement is there will be another tetrahedral void just over tetrahedral void. Yes, this statement is correct. So here the incorrect statement is only C. So my answer here is option number C. Next we will see question number 24. So here we have question number 24. Now in question 24, we have been given a mixture of KCl concentrated H2SO4 and K2Cr2O7 is heated in a dry test tube and red vapors of R formed. Now this line clearly indicates that this is basically chromyl chloride test for chloride ion, and we can see from here that the red vapors are formed because of CrO2 Cl2. Then these R pass through aqueous NaOH giving yellow solution due to the formation of S. Now we know that chromyl chloride, that is CrO2 Cl2, reacts with NaOH and forms sodium chromate, and the sodium chromate has yellow color. Because of this, the solution is yellow in color. Now after that, this yellow solution is acidified with acetic acid, okay, because initially it is basic because of the presence of NaOH, and then on treatment with silver nitrate forms a red solid, and now this red solid is because of formation of silver chromate. Now let's write the equations involved for these statements. So first we have KCl, which reacts with H2SO4 and K2Cr2O7 and forms CrO2Cl2, that is chromyl chloride, which have red vapors, along with KHSO4 and H2O. Now here I am not doing the balancing part. Then the CrO2Cl2 basically reacts with my sodium hydroxide and form a yellow solution, and this yellow solution is because of Na2CrO4. Just remember this thing, that chromate ions or chromate salts are generally yellow in color, plus NaCl plus H2O. And after that, what happens, that this sodium chromate basically reacts with silver nitrate and it leads to the formation of a red solid, and this red solid is because of silver chromate. Now these are the equations that are involved in this reaction. Now let's see what are the options, and we have to select here the incorrect statement. So read the question carefully. First option says oxidation state of central metal atom in R is +3. Now R is basically CrO2Cl2, and here the oxidation state of chromium, that is my central atom, is +6, not +3. So this statement is incorrect. So this will be the answer, but let's go for other options also. Oxidation state of central atom in R and S is same. Now in R we have CrO2Cl2. Here the oxidation state is +6, and in S we have sodium chromate, that is Na2CrO4, and here also the oxidation state of chromium is +6. So yes, this statement is correct. Red solid T is Ag2CrO4. Yes, this is silver chromate. And last is, in the balanced chemical equation of formation of R, the stoichiometric coefficient of KHSO4 is 6. Now we have to do the balancing of equation. So if I do the balancing, what we get is, here we have K2Cr2O7, CrO2Cl2. Now let's first write 2 here, because here we have 2 Cr atoms. Now because of that, the total number of chlorine here becomes 4. So let's write 4 here. And after that, you can see we get 4 potassium from here and 2 potassium from here. And here potassium is present only in KHSO4. It means the coefficient of KHSO4 should be 6. Now what about my sulfur? Now here we have 6 sulfur, and here in H2SO4 we have sulfur. In other reactants we do not have sulfur atoms, so the balancing of sulfur will be done through this only. So we will write 6 here. Now let's see whether my equation is balanced or not. So I have 4 potassium, 6 potassium, yes, 6 potassium are there. I have 4 chlorine, then 12 hydrogen atoms, 6 KHSO4, as well as I have to write 3 H2O. So here my hydrogen is balanced. Then sulfur is already balanced. Then oxygen is 24 plus 7, that is 31. And here we have 4 plus 24, 28 plus 3, 31. Yes, oxygen is balanced and then chromium is also balanced. So this is the final balanced equation. Now here the coefficient of KHSO4 is 6. And in the question we have been given that in the balanced chemical equation, the formation of R, the coefficient of KHSO4 is 6. Yes, this is correct. So I have to select the incorrect statement, and the only incorrect statement among these four is A. So answer here is option A. Now moving on to my next question. Now this is from ionic equilibrium, you can say equilibrium. Here we have been given phosphoric acid, that is H3PO4. We know the basicity of phosphoric acid is 3. It has 3 replaceable H plus ions. Now the pKa1, pKa2 and pKa3 values are given. What is pKa1, pKa2 and pKa3? We know that H3PO4 gives H plus and forms H2PO4 minus. Again it removes one H plus or lost one H plus and forms HPO4 2 minus, and finally it removes one more H plus and forms PO4 3 minus. So these pKa1, pKa2 and pKa3 are given for these 3 acids, that is H3PO4, H2PO4 minus and HPO4 2 minus. Now after that we have been given a phosphate buffer has pH equal to 7. That with the help of any two conjugate acid base pairs we formed a buffer, and that buffer is having pH 7. The sum of the concentration of components present in the buffer is 0.104 molar. Identify the correct statement. And we have been given certain values, that given 10 to the power 0.2 is 1.6, log 7 by 5 is 0.15, and we have been given 4 statements. Let's read them. The first statement says to make this buffer, the predominant conjugate pair would be H3PO4 and H2PO4 minus. Now see, the pKa of H3PO4 is 2, whereas the pKa of H2PO4 minus is 6.8, and the pH is 7, which is between the 6.8 and 12.6. It means my buffer contains the conjugate pair, that is H2PO4 minus and HPO4 2 minus, because my pH is lying between the pKa values of these two. So here this will behave as acid and this will behave as its conjugate base. So the first statement, which is H3PO4 and H2PO4 minus, no, this statement is incorrect. Then second statement says to make this buffer, the predominant conjugate pair would be H2PO4 minus and HPO4 2 minus. Yes, this statement is correct. Now we have to look for other options also. Now here the third statement says the new pH after addition of 50 ml of this to 30 ml of buffer is 6.65, and in the buffer H2PO4 minus is this. Now here we have to do the calculation part. So let's do that. We have a buffer which contains H2PO4 minus, which loses H plus and forms H plus and HPO4 2 minus. Okay, so this is behaving as acid and this is the conjugate base. Now if I write the pH for this buffer, I can write it as pH is equals to pKa of this one plus log concentration of salt upon concentration of acid, and here the one that is behaving as salt is HPO4 2 minus, and the one which is behaving as acid is H2PO4 minus. Now the pH that has been given to us is 7. pK value of H2PO4 minus is 6.8 plus log HPO4 2 minus divided by H2PO4 minus. Now we can see from here that this is log 0.104 minus x divided by x is equal to 0.2. Now what I have done here is I have taken the concentration of H2PO4 minus as x, and if I have taken that as x, then ultimately the concentration of HPO4 2 minus will become 0.104 minus x, because the summation of concentration of these two is 0.104. Now solving this, 0.104 minus x upon x is equals to 10 to the power 0.2, and we have been given the value of 0.2, that is 10 to the power 0.2 is 1.6. So this is 0.104 minus x is equals to 1.6x. Now if I solve this, then the value of x that we obtain from here is 4 into 10 to the power minus 2, that is 0.04. Now if H2PO4 minus is 0.04, then what is the value of HPO4 2 minus? That is 0.104 minus 0.04, that is, this is 0.064, or I can write it as concentration of HPO4 2 minus is 6.4 into 10 to the power minus 2. Now we have calculated the concentrations in the initial buffer. Let's see. Our last option, it says in the given buffer H2PO4 minus is 4 into 10 to the power minus 2 molar. Yes, this one is the correct statement. But we have to look for option C. It says the new pH after the addition of 50 ml of 0.0124 molar HCl to 30 ml of this buffer is 6.65. So what we have to do here, first we will calculate the number of millimoles or moles of HPO4 2 minus and H2PO4 minus, and then we will add H plus and see what is happening after then, that how the concentration is changing. So here initially I have 30 ml of buffer. In 30 ml I can say the concentration of HPO4 2 minus is what? Its concentration is 6.4 into 10 to the power minus 2, and 30 ml can be written as 30 into 10 to the power minus 3. So these are the moles of HPO4 2 minus initially. Similarly for H2PO4 minus, what is the number of millimoles or moles? These are basically moles because I am multiplying 10 to the power minus 3 here. So this is 4 into 10 to the power minus 2 into 30 into 10 to the power minus 3. So this is how we calculated the initial moles of these two ions. After that, if I am adding acid, this acid is first reacting with my conjugate base, and here the conjugate base is HPO4 2 minus, and it is reacting with H plus and forming what? H2PO4 minus. Initially I have 6.4 into 30 into 10 to the power 5 moles of HPO4 2 minus, and I am adding how much? 50 ml of what? 50 ml of 0.0124 molar. 0.0124 molar. Yes, there is lengthy calculation here, but in some questions in JEE also you will find such lengthy calculations. We have seen that in previous questions we do not find such lengthy calculations. So yes, in 1 or 2 questions you can see that. So if I want to calculate the moles of H plus, then it is 1.24 into 10 to the power minus 2 into 50 into 10 to the power minus 3, and that is 1.24 into 50 into 10 to the power minus 5. Okay, so this is the concentration of H plus that we are adding, and initially this is 4 into 30 into 10 to the power minus 5. After reaction, what happens? That my H plus will add on this, or I will say that my salt concentration will be reduced and my acid concentration will be enhanced, and that's why finally I will get this as 13 into 10 to the power minus 4, this as 18.2 into 10 to the power minus 4, and this will be consumed from here. Now these are the final concentrations. So what we have to do now? We know that finally the volume of both is same. So whether I take volume or not, that doesn't matter. So pH is equals to pKa plus log salt, moles of salt divided by volume. I am not taking the volume here because volume will get cancelled out, and this is 18.2 into 10 to the power minus 4, and you can see from here that we have been given log 7 by 5 value, that is 0.15, and if I put it here, then we have the reverse of that, and on solving we get 6.65 because this term will get subtracted with the minus sign. So the new pH is 6.65. so the correct statement are B, C and D. So this is how we solve question number 25. Next we are moving on to question number 26. So in question number 26, it says consider the following energy profile diagram for the given elimination reaction, and here we have been given the mechanism also, that it goes via A1 mechanism, that is unimolecular elimination of a tertiary halide R1, R2, R3 containing different halogen atoms with same alkyl group. It means my R part is same here, only my X part is changing, that we have three options here, either it can be chlorine, bromine or iodine. Now after that, two possible products are obtained as P1 and P2 having different energies. Identify the correct statements. Now here we have been given four options. R1 can be this, P1 is 2-methyl-but1-ene, P2 has 9 hyperconjugable hydrogens, P1 on reaction with bromine, presence of CCl4 will give our racemic mixture. Now if you see the question here, then we have something like this. So this is our graph, and this is the reaction, that we have this R group which is attached with this X. This can be chlorine, bromine or iodine, and it is undergoing E1 elimination, forming two alkenes. One is P1 and the other one is P2. Now if you see that the energy of my intermediate is same in all the cases, it means all are forming the same carbocation. But the thing is, if you see the activation energy barrier, this is different for different reagents. Now we know that better the leaving group, the more easily it can form the carbocation, or the energy required for formation of carbocation is less in that case. And we know the leaving tendency of any alkyl halide is that Ri undergoes faster reaction than RBr than RCl. The reason is the leaving tendency, and that is iodine is having higher leaving group tendency than Br than Cl. So my first part is clear, that in case of iodine the energy required, so for Ri the energy required is less, and for RCl the energy required is maximum. So I can say that R1 basically contains chlorine, R2 contains bromine, and R3 contains iodine. Now if we talk about the product after formation of carbocation, that X group leaves in elimination reaction, what happens, that your X group leaves, leaving behind the carbocation, that is this one, and now a hydrogen removes from the beta position, and it leads to generation of a double bond. Now this double bond can be more substituted, which is my Sade-Zeff product, and also it can lose from the less hindered position, and from there I will get the Hofmann product. Now if we talk about the stability of these two structures, you can see that my first structure, let's say this is X and this is Y. This X is basically more stable because of the more number of alpha hydrogens for double bond, which undergoes basically hyperconjugation. Similarly for Y, we have only 5 alpha hydrogens, and here for X we have 9 alpha hydrogens, so there is more hyperconjugation, greater stability. So I can say one thing, that among P1 and P2, my P2 is more stable, so it is basically my X, whereas my P1 here is Y, which is a less stable, because if the energy is higher, it means the stability is lesser. So we now know that what is P1, what is P2. R1 contains chlorine, R3 contains iodine, R2 contains bromine. Now let's look at the options. So the first option is R1 can be this, containing Cl. Yes, this is correct statement. P1 is 2-methylbutyronine. Now P1, let's see what is P1. So P1 is 2-methyl, the IUPAC name of this compound is 2-methylbutyronine. Yes, this is also a correct statement. Then P2 has 9 hyperconjugable hydrogens. Yes, we have seen this. And P1 on reaction with bromine CCl4 will give a racemic mixture. Now you can see that if I react P1 with Br2 CCl4, what will happen? That it will form something like this. Br comes here and Br comes here, and this carbon is having a stereogenic center or a chiral center, and yes, it will form a racemic mixture. So all the options are correct here. So for this question, the answer is A, B, C and D. Now moving on to my next question, that is question number 27. Now in question number 27, we have been given E1, E2, E3 and E4 are the energy differences between given molecular orbitals in an N2 molecule. Now in molecular orbital theory, we have studied about the energy of different molecular orbitals which are formed by combination of my atomic orbitals. Now in N2, we know that there the pi bonding orbital is having lower energy than my sigma bonding orbital in 2p. Similarly, if we talk about oxygen, then the case is reversed. There the sigma 2p is having lesser energy, that is pi bonding 2p orbitals. Now here we have been given the energy differences or the transition from one orbital to another molecular orbital, and we have to see that which of the following is or are correct order. Now let's first draw the molecular orbital diagram of nitrogen. I know you all know about this, that in N2 we have 14 electrons. We have atomic orbitals of same energy because we are having here same atoms, so the energy of their atomic orbitals is also same. So here we are talking about N2, and we know that the atomic orbital energies of both the nitrogen atoms is same, and they will form molecular orbital. Now let's draw the molecular orbital energy diagram. Here first what we have is sigma 1s bonding molecular orbital, then we have sigma star 1s, that is the anti-bonding molecular orbital, then we have sigma 2s bonding, and then we have sigma star 2s. Now after that what we have is pi 2px and pi 2py bonding molecular orbitals. Then after that we have sigma 2pz bonding molecular orbital, then pi star 2px and pi star 2py, and finally sigma star 2pz. Now let's see that what are these different energy differences. So first is pi 2py to pi star 2pz is E1. So pi star 2py, that is this one, sigma star 2pz, it means to here. This energy gap is basically E1. Then in the second case we have been given pi 2px to sigma star 2pz. It means this energy gap. This is E2. Then we have pi 2px to pi star 2py. That is this gap. This is E3. And finally sigma 2pz to sigma star 2pz. It means this one. This is my E4. Now we have four options and we have to see that what is the relationship between these energy. So first option is E2 greater than E1, and next is E3 greater than E2. So E2 greater than E1 and E3 greater than E2. Let's check these two options. So you can see that E2 is much higher than E1. So yes, this statement is correct. Then E3 greater than E2. We can see from the figure or the energy profile diagram that E3 is lesser than E2. So this statement is incorrect. Then we have E4 greater than E1 and E2 greater than E4. E4 greater than E1 and E2 greater than E4. Now E4 and E1, what is the relationship between them? Yes, E4 is greater than E1. This is correct. And E4, we can see that E2 is having maximum energy in these transitions. So yes, E2 is greater than E4. So my first, third and fourth options are correct here. So the answer is A, C and D. Only B option is incorrect. Now moving on to my next question, that is question number 28. Now in question 28, we have been given a protein source. A sequence of amino acids is examined. Complete hydrolysis of 1 mole of a fragment gives 3 mole of aniline, 2 mole of glycine and 1 mole of serine. See, this question is from your protein part, where we have been given different amino acid, a polypeptide chain is formed and we want to know the sequencing. And for sequencing, what they do is they give us the monomer units, that is what are the alpha amino acid that is obtained on hydrolysis. That is 3 moles of alanine, 3 alanine are there, 2 moles of glycine and 1 mole of serine. Now if you see here, it also says partial hydrolysis of the same fragment yields serine, gly and serine gly. It means we are getting these as fragments on partial hydrolysis, and this gives me information that which amino acid should be between what amino acid, what comes after which amino acid. So we get a rough idea about the sequencing. And finally they ask that which of the following peptide or peptides can be obtained on partial hydrolysis. That apart from these 4, what are the other fragments which we can obtain on partial hydrolysis? But first we have to draw the structure of peptide. You can see we have alanine, glycine, alanine. It means between 2 alanine there should be a glycine unit. And also if you see the third fragment, it has gly. It means 2 glycine units are adjacent to each other. And from these two, I can derive a relation that 2 alanines are nearby, Between that there is a glycine unit, and then we have a alanine unit. So we have this 4 unit peptide. Now after that there is more relation, that after alanine we have serine. After alanine we have serine, it means on the right side, and here you can see that 2 alanines are side by, and after alanine we have glycine. It means this serine is on the right of this last alanine, and also after serine, from the last part, we have a glycine unit. So we have 3 alanine here, 2 glycine and 1 serine. So this is the structure of my peptide chain. Now let's see that what are the other fragments we can obtain from this. Glyalaserine, glycine, alanine, serine. Yes, we can obtain this unit. Second is alanine, serine, glycine. Alanine, serine, glycine. Yes, we can obtain this unit also. Then glycine, alanine, alanine, glycine, alanine. No, after glycine we have alanine, but then serine. So we cannot get glycine, alanine, alanine. This is incorrect. Then we have alanine, alanine, serine. So alanine, alanine, glycine we have, but not serine. So again, this cannot be the fragment. So from this we can say one thing, that the correct option for this question is A and B, that is glyalaserine and alaserine glycine. Now we have question number 29. Now in question number 29, what is given is consider RS configuration of the following molecules, identify the correct statements. Now here we have been given 3 compounds, and for these 3 compounds, first we have to determine their R or S configuration, that is the absolute configuration, and then we have to see that which options are correct. So let's do this question. Now here let's take compound 1, and first what we do is, first we will draw its Fisher projection. And when we draw the Fisher projection, what we have to do is, first we will draw my solid line on the vertical axis. So this is the center carbon, this is SH, this is CHO, and the one which is shown by dash should be put on the side where it is shown. For example, it is showing on the right hand side, so we will put it there, and the one which is shown by wedge will be placed here. So this is how we draw the Fisher projection, that the wedge and dash are seen to be coming towards us, whereas the one which are shown in solid line will be going inside the plane, and they should be shown in the vertical line, and these wedge and dash are shown on the horizontal line. Now after that, let's do the numbering according to my CIP rules. So sulfur is having higher atomic number, this is 1. Then among carbon and nitrogen, which is having higher atomic number, nitrogen, so this is 2, then 3, and finally this is 4. Now what we have to do now, first we will hide our 4th and we'll move from 1 to 2 to 3. So 1 to 2 to 3, and you can see we are moving in anti-clockwise direction. And if I am moving in anti-clockwise direction, it means the configuration here should be S. But as my lowest priority group is on the horizontal line, so I will give it R. Then compound 2, if I draw its Fisher projection, then ET and secondary butyl are on the vertical line, and you can see dash will be sulfur and H, so it will be shown on the right side, whereas this H is on the left hand side. Now let's do the numbering again, that is 1, this is secondary butyl, so this is 2, ethyl 3, and hydrogen 4. Now again hide 4, move from 1 to 2 to 3. This is clockwise, so it should be R, but again lowest priority on horizontal axis, it becomes S. So compound 1 is R, compound 2 is. Now if we look at compound 3, then what we have is, we have this structure. We have H here, and here we have NHCH3. Now first thing is, we have to determine their RS configuration, and we have to do the numbering through IUPAC convention, and you know by IUPAC OH is on higher priority, so this carbon is 1 and this carbon is 2. Now if I look at my first carbon and if I do the numbering, then this OH should be given first priority according to CIP. Then if you look at these two, then this is carbon attached to nitrogen, carbon and hydrogen, and if I look at this carbon, it is attached with carbon, hydrogen and hydrogen. It means this should be given second, this is third, and this is fourth one. Now we have two ways to do this. First is, either I hold H and look at 1, 2 and 3. If I am moving in clockwise, then it is R, and if I am moving in anti-clockwise direction, then it is S. And the second way is that I assume two bonds in a way that they are going away from me. Those which are coming towards me are on the horizontal line, and which are going away from me are in vertical line. Now if I do this for this carbon atom, that is first carbon atom, and if I hold my H and look at this OH, this second bond and the third priority group, then you can see that we are moving in the clockwise direction, and that's why the configuration of this carbon is R. Similarly, if you look at the second carbon, then here we have one H also, we have one NHCH3 group, one this group. Now if I do the priority, then this is my first group, this is my second group, this one my third priority, and this one is the fourth priority group. Now again what we have to do, we have to hold the fourth priority group and look for 1, 2 and 3. And if I do this, it looks like that I am moving in anti-clockwise direction, so the configuration of this one is S. So first carbon is having R configuration, whereas the second one is having S configuration. So let's look at the answers. So first is compound 1 has S configuration. We have seen that compound 1 has R configuration, so this one is incorrect. Then compound 2 has S configuration. Yes, compound 2 has S configuration. Compound 3 has R configuration at carbon atom 1, and carbon atom 1 is this one according to IUPAC. So yes, this is R. And compound 3 has R configuration at carbon atom 2. No, this one is S. So my correct answer is B and C. Now moving on to next question, that is question number 30. Now see, this question is basically from electrochemistry. The question says the resistance of three different acetic acid solutions X, Y and Z is 50, 100 ohm and 150 ohm respectively, measured using same conductivity cell at 27 degrees Celsius. Now here we have been given three different solutions. The first solution is having resistance 50 ohm, the second one is having resistance 100 ohm, and the third one is having resistance 150 ohm. And we are checking these resistance using the same conductivity cell. It means their L by A is basically a constant value. Let's take it as G, and this is the cell constant. So for these three cells, my cell constant is same. And also the temperature is same. Now we are taking only acetic acid. It means the difference in conductivity is maybe due to the different number of ions in the solution, because we are not changing the temperature as well as the cell constant is same. Now the second part says that if equal volumes of solutions X, Y and Z are mixed and taken in the same conductivity cell, identify the incorrect statement. Now let's look at this question. We have been given three solutions of acetic acid, let's say A, B and C. One is having a resistance of 50 ohm, 100 ohm and 150 ohm. And now I have taken equal volumes from all these three. Let's say I have taken V volume from this, V volume from this and V volume from this. And I have mixed this in this container. And let's say the volume now is 3V, because if we combine V, 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 the total volume is 3V. Now we have to determine the resistance of this solution. We don't know how to calculate the resistance, but we know one thing, that the conductance of this final mixture is basically summation from the conductance of all three solutions. So the conductance in final solution, conductance mixture, is conductance in 1 plus conductance 2 plus conductance 3. And also we can use a formula for solving such type of problems when our final volume is changing. That is, kappa mixture, V mixture is equals to kappa 1 V1 plus kappa 2 V2 plus kappa 3 V3. That this kappa shows the conductivity of my final mixture into volume, that is the total volume of mixture, is equal to kappa 1 V1 plus kappa 2 V2 plus kappa 3 V3, that is for respective solutions. Now here kappa is basically conductivity, and we know that formula is R is equals to rho L by A, or 1 by rho is equals to 1 by R L by A. This L by A is basically the cell constant. I have shown this by G sign, and this 1 by rho is basically the conductivity of solution. So conductivity is 1 by R into cell constant. So I can write it as 1 by resistance mixture into G into V mixture is 3V is equals to 1 by R1 into G into V, because the volume are taken as V for all the three solutions. So this is 1 by R2 G into V plus 1 by R3 into G into V. Now here these will be cancelled out, and what we are left with is 3 by R mixture is equals to 1 by R1, that is 1 by 50, 1 by 100 plus 1 by 150. And if we solve this, my resistance mixture comes out to be something around 81.8 ohm. Okay. Now here the option says that the resistance of the final solution is 81.8 ohm approx. Yes, this statement is correct, but we are looking for the incorrect statement, so this will not be the answer. The second is contribution to resistance from each solution is equal. Is the contribution from all these solutions equal? No, the contribution for resistance is not equal, because the same volume is providing different resistances. Then the concentration of solutions X, Y and Z is equal. No, again, because the volume is same, and as the contribution of volume is same, cell constant is same, and if the resistances are different, it means the number of ions in the solution is different, and if the number of ions in solution is different, it means the concentration of acetic acid there is different. So yes, this statement is also incorrect, but it will be in the option. Then contribution of conductivity from each solution in the resulting mixture is same. No, the resistance contribution is different, as well as the conductivity contribution is also different because of the presence of different number of ions. So the incorrect statement in this question is B, C and D. Now moving on to numerical type questions. So the first numerical question is question number 31. It says a certain heat engine operates between 1000 Kelvin and 600 Kelvin. If 0.5 kilojoule of heat is absorbed reversibly from hot source, then X kilojoule of heat is discharged into sink. The entropy of mixing of 5 mole of hexane with 5 mole of heptane at 300 Kelvin is 12 joule per Kelvin. The Gibbs free energy of mixing is Y kilojoule. The value of X plus Y modulus is. Now here, first part we have been given that energy is taken or heat is taken from a hot reservoir in a heat engine which is operating at T1 temperature, which is basically 1000 Kelvin, and T2 which is 600 Kelvin. So my T1, that the hot reservoir is at temperature 1000 Kelvin and it is doing work, and finally the heat is discharged into sink which operates at a temperature 600 Kelvin. Now we know that there is a formula for calculating the efficiency for such heat engines, and this efficiency is given by eta, and eta is 1 minus T2, that is the temperature of sink divided by temperature of source, that from where the heat is taken. And here we have 1 minus 600 divided by 1000, which is 1 minus 0.6 or 0.4. So this is the maximum efficiency. And as the heat engine is doing work reversibly, it means it is working at the maximum efficiency. So if I want to calculate work from here, what I have to do? I have to multiply this 0.4 into the amount of heat that is absorbed from source, that is 0.5 kilojoule is equal to, this is 0.2 kilojoule. Now this is work, but we have to calculate here the amount of heat that is discharged into sink. So heat discharged is what? It is the amount of heat that is taken from source minus the work done, and this comes out to be 0.3 kilojoule. Now my first part is done. Now in second part, what we are doing is we are calculating the Gibbs free energy of mixing, and we know the entropy of mixing of two compounds, that is hexane and heptane. Now hexane and heptane have similar type of interaction. It means they are forming the ideal solution, and if they are forming the ideal solution, I can say one thing, that delta H mixing is 0 for hexane and heptane. Okay, and we also know one formula, that is delta G is equals to delta H minus T delta S. Now here we have to calculate delta G, and this value is equal to 0. So what I have to do, I have to provide only a temperature and the change in entropy of mixing. So the temperature here is 300 Kelvin and the entropy of mixing is 12 joule per Kelvin. So here we have 300 Kelvin temperature, and the amount of entropy that is changed is 12 joule per Kelvin. If I multiply these two, then this value comes out to be in joule, but I want the energy in kilojoules. So what we have to do, we have to divide it by 1000 also. So from here, if you do the calculation, 12 times 3 is 36 with 2 zeros, and we will get minus 3.6 kilojoule. Now this value is nothing but Y, whereas the earlier one is X, and the question asks for what is the value of X plus Y modulus. So this is, that is, my X is 0.3, this is X, that is 0.3, and here Y is minus 3.6, and if I do the calculation, I will get 3.3. So the answer of this question is 03.30 because we have to write the answer up to 2 decimal places. Now moving on to next question, that is question number 32. It says the energy difference between the reactant and product, that is the enthalpy change of reaction, and reactant and activated complex or transition state for a bimolecular reaction at 1000 Kelvin is 200 kilojoule per mole and 50 kilojoule per mole respectively. So here we have been given two energies. One is enthalpy change between my reactant and product, and the other is the energy difference between my reactant energy and the transition state energy. And what is this energy called? This energy is known as activation energy. Now the second part that is given is for the same reaction the entropy of activation is minus 200 joule per Kelvin per mole. So we have enthalpy of activation and also we have entropy of activation, and the question is asking for the free energy of activation is x kilojoule per mole. The value of x by 10 is. Now see, this question is very easy. We have been giving the enthalpy of reaction just to confuse us, but in this question we have to apply a simple formula, that is delta G is equals to delta H minus T delta S. This delta H is for activation, this delta S is also for activation, and this delta G is for activation. So we have to apply this formula, we have to put the values here and the work is done. So for example, the delta H that is given to us is 50 kilojoule per mole. So just write 50 here, as energy of activation is positive, so, and also it is given that it is positive, so I have written plus 50 minus the temperature at which this reaction is happening is 1000 Kelvin into delta S, that is the entropy of activation, and that is minus 200 joule per Kelvin per mole, but from there the value is in joule per Kelvin, but here I want it in kilojoules, so that's why I have to divide this by 1000 because this enthalpy of activation is given in kilojoule per mole. Similarly, T delta S should also be in kilojoule per mole. Now after that what we are left with is 50, and this becomes a positive sign, minus minus positive, and here we have 200, so this is 250 kilojoule per mole. Now after that this value is basically x, but here we are asking that what is the value of x by 10. So the value of x by 10 is simply 250 by 10, or it is 25. So this is 25. So the answer of this question is 25.00. So my next question is question number 33. Now here we have question number 33. Now this question says when light of 475.2 nanometer wavelength is incident on I2 molecule, it dissociates into I atoms. That when light falls, this I2 dissociate into I. Initially 0.1 mole of I2 is present, 0.1 mole. Now a bulb of power 100 watt. It means this bulb is giving 100 joule per second energy. Emitting monochromatic light of wavelength 475.2 nanometer is incident for T seconds on I2 molecules. Now this bulb is basically giving monochromatic light which is falling on the I2 molecules, breaking it into I atoms. Now after T seconds, the undissociated I2. So after T seconds, what happens? That some part of I2 have been dissociated into I and some part remains undissociated. And this undissociated I2 is titrated with hypo solution, and for complete titration 1.6 molar 100 ml of hypo solution is required. Find the value of T assuming only one photon interacts with one molecule. See, this question is interesting. Here we do not have to move from top to bottom. Here we'll move from the last to initial part. So what we will do here is, first we will calculate the quantity of hypo required for titration, and from there we will get an idea that what is the amount of iodine that remains undissociated. Now if I know the amount of undissociated iodine, I can say one thing, that what is the amount of iodine reacted or dissociated in presence of light. And if I know that thing, I can easily calculate the time in which that dissociation happens. Okay, so the initial moles of my hypo, now hypo is Na2H2O3, that is sodium thiosulfate. Now this hypo is 1.6 molar into 100 ml, but as I am writing moles, so I have to take the volume in liter, and this becomes 0.16. Now if you see here, we know that the equivalence of hypo is equal to equivalence of iodine, because in a chemical reaction the equivalence of all the reacting substances as well as the product formed is same. So equivalent of I2 is equal to equivalent of hypo. Now we know that the valency factor for iodine is 2, as it is going from I2 to I, that the oxidation state changes 1. So this is 2 into moles of I2 that remains or that reacts with my hypo solution is equal to moles of hypo, that is 0.16 into valency factor for hypo. Now hypo undergoes a change, it goes from Na2H2O3 to Na2S4O6. Now here the oxidation state of sulfur is +2, whereas here the oxidation state, you can see this is 12 minus 2, that is 10 divided by 4, 5 by 2, 2.5. So the valency factor for hypo is 1 from here. Now as the valency factor is 1, so I can say the moles of I2. So these are basically the moles of I2. Moles of I2 that reacts with hypo is basically 0.08 moles. Now we have calculated the moles that reacts with hypo, so it means these are the undissociated iodine with light. So what amount of iodine reacts? So the amount of iodine that undergoes dissociation by light is basically that dissociates is initial moles minus the moles that dissociated is equal to 0.02 moles. Now the last part is to calculate the time. Here we know that the power is 100 watt, that is 100 joule in 1 second. So if I say that the time taken is T and power is 100, then the total energy given out by bulb is 100 into T, which is nothing but NHC by lambda. You have studied it in atomic structure that it is NHC by lambda, and is the number of quanta. Now quanta here is 0.02, that is number of moles, into Avogadro number, and Avogadro value that is given to us is 6 into 10 to the power 23. So this is 6 into 10 to the power 23 into H, that is 6.6 into 10 to the power minus 34. This is 6.6 into 10 to the power minus 34 into C, that is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second, that is the speed of light, divided by lambda. Now lambda is 475.2 nanometer. 475.2 nanometer. If I convert it into meter, then this is 10 to the power minus 9. Now this t becomes 0.02 into 6 into 10 to the power 23 into 6.6 into 10 to the power minus 34 into 3 into 10 to the power 8 divided by 100 into 475.2 into 10 to the power minus 9. If you solve this, this comes out as 50. So the time that is required for this dissociation is 50 seconds. So the answer is 50.00. Next, moving on to my next question. So here we have given question number 34. Now in question 34, it says, consider the following reaction sequence along with percentage yield. Now first we have been given benzaldehyde. Now this benzaldehyde is reacting with Grignard reagent, that is MEMGBr, in presence of T2O, that is diethyl ether, followed by H3O plus, and the percentage yield is 80%, and then a compound is formed, that is X. Now this X is oxidized by Zone's reagent, and here the percentage yield is 50% and the compound formed is Y. And finally again we have been given benzaldehyde in basic medium, that is OH minus, with heat, and a compound Z is formed with percentage yield 80%. Now the question says, if the reaction is started with 1 mole of PHCHO and other reagents are sufficiently present, it means they are present in excess, then how much Z will be formed in grams? So first thing is, we will do the reaction and then we will look for the calculations. So here, as you can see, we have PHCOH, and this is reacting with Grignard, MEMGBr. So this Me delta minus and this is delta plus. This basically attacks on this carbon, and this pi bond moves here, or pi electrons moves here, and we get PHCO minus MgBr, and we have methyl group here and a H here. Now after that, what happens? There is this H3O plus, so we will get a secondary alcohol here, and this is my compound X. Now this X, that is PHCOHH is oxidized by Zone's reagent, and we know Zone's reagent oxidizes a secondary alcohol to ketone. So this is Zone's reagent. It oxidizes it to PH, C double bond O, CH3. And finally, we are reacting it with PH, COH, presence of OH minus and heat. Now here you can see that my Y is having alpha hydrogens. This PHCHO that has been provided to us does not contain any alpha hydrogen, and we are providing basic medium. It means it is a crossed aldol condensation. So a carbon ion is formed on this PHCOCH3, and this carbon ion attacks on this. So here what happens is PHCOCH2 minus will be formed first, which can be represented as O minus, C double bond CH2, and this attacks on PH, COH, and it moves here, this moves here, cross aldol will happen, and finally after even CB mechanism, the formed compound is a alpha beta unsaturated COPH. So this will be the final product, that is PHCH double bond CHCOPH. So let me write it here, that X is PH CHOH CH3. Y is PHCOCH3, and Z is alpha beta unsaturated carbonyl compound, which is this one. Now let's look at the second part, which says if the reaction is started with 1 mole of this. So initially I have 1 mole of this and the other reagents are sufficiently present. So 1 mole, if gives 80% yield, then what is the amount of X formed? The amount of X formed is 0.8 mole. Then this 0.8 mole undergoes oxidation with 50% yield and gives PHCOCH3. So if this is 0.8 and the yield is 50%, I can say this, that the amount of this compound is half of this, that is 0.4 moles. And after that, after aldol reaction, you can see that the percentage yield is 80%. So 80% of 0.4, 8 into 4 is 32. So here we get 0.32 moles. Now what we have to do, we have to calculate the mass, and for mass we have to calculate the molar mass of PHCH Now here we have total 6 plus 6 plus 3, 15 carbon atoms. Number of hydrogen is 5 here, 5 here, that is 10, 11 and 12. 12 hydrogen and 1 oxygen atom, and if you calculate this, 15 into 12 plus 16, this is 208. Now I have to calculate mass. So mass is 208 into 0.32, and this value is 66.56 grams. So the mass of Z that is obtained is 66.56. Moving on to my next question, that is question number 35. Now 35 says BCl3 and NH4Cl were heated to give compound X. When X is treated with sodium borohydride to give another compound Y, the sum of lone pairs of electrons and pi bonds in X and Y is compounds X and Y are aromatic. So first reaction is BCl3 and NH4Cl, and we know that when these two combine, it leads to the formation of B3N3H3Cl3. Now this compound is something like this, that the skeleton is similar to that of benzene, and the compound B3N3H6 is also known as inorganic benzene because of its similarity with benzene, or the similar properties with benzene. So here we have B and Bn. So these are the sigma bonds. Now the more electronegative atom is attached to boron, that is chlorine, whereas the less electronegative hydrogens are on nitrogen atom. Now here you can do two things. Either you show nitrogen lone pairs or you can write the pi bonds. But in question they are asking for the sum of lone pairs of electrons and the pi bonds. It means whether I draw pi bond or I will write only the lone pair, it does not matter because the sum remains the same. So let's draw double bond here, because this compound is aromatic because of the 2p pi 2p pi bond formation between boron and nitrogen. Now here, now nitrogen does not contain any lone pair because the only single lone pair that it has been provided to boron, but my chlorine atoms contains 3 lone pairs. So 3 lone pairs are present on each chlorine. So total 9 lone pairs from chlorine atoms, and the total number of pi bonds here is 3. So we have 12 is as the sum of pi bonds and lone pairs in compound X, because this compound is represented as X. But after reaction with NaBH4, we have B3N3H3Cl3, and when it reacts with NaBH4, NaBH4 is basically a hydride donor. It donates hydride and removes chloride from the compound and forms B3N3H6, and the structure is just the same what we have seen in the next slide. So again, let's write the alternate pi bonds. This is H, 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 and H. Now here we have 3 pi bonds and we do not have any lone pairs, so in Y we have only 3 pi bonds plus lone pairs. Earlier we have 12, so 12 plus 3 is what? It is 15. So the answer of this question is 15.00. Now moving on to the last question of today's paper discussion. The question says consider the following reaction. So here we have been given 2 organic reactions. In first reaction we have been given a compound which reacts with alcoholic KOH. So here E2 elimination will take place, alkene will be formed, and after that it reacts with excess of HBr and forms a tribromo derivative. After that there is another equation in which again a compound is given. It reacts with concentrated H2SO4. So here elimination takes place, yes, but the elimination is E1 elimination and followed by Br2H nu. It means here radical mechanism bromination will take place. So bromination happens but with the radical mechanism and a dibromo derivative is obtained. And the question is saying that the sum of total number of stereoisomers possible for Y and Q is. Compound X, Y, P and Q are basically the major products. So let's begin solving this question. So here first we have alcoholic KOH, so no rearrangement, alkene will be formed, Br will be lost and a beta hydrogen will be lost from here. So this H and Br, this H and Br and this H and Br will be lost. And if these are lost, what we obtained is something like this. And this is my X. Now this reacts with excess HBr. Now if this reacts with excess HBr, what will happen is that the carbocation H plus attacks on alkene, carbocation will be formed, and we know that carbocation is more stable on tertiary center, so we get tribromo derivative here because HBr is in excess, so all these tertiary carbons will get bromine, and this is why later we will see the stereoisomers of this compound, but here we have obtained the product. After that, now the second compound basically reacts with concentrated H2SO4. Now concentrated H2SO4 when reacts with this forms H2 plus. So this is OH2 plus, which is a very good leaving group. It leaves, carbocation is formed, it rearranges to a 3-degree position. Similarly, these alkenes also take H plus from H2SO4 and they also undergoes elimination, and finally to attain aromaticity we will get a compound like this. Now this is my P. Now this compound reacts with Br2H nu. 2 equivalents are there. It means 2 bromines are added on these alkyl substituents. They can be on a particular carbon atom or on different carbon atoms. Now we have to look for all the possibilities. So we have P and here we have Y. So Y is 3-methyl and 3-bromo on these positions. Now we have to look for the possible stereoisomers. Now let's take the first case where all methyl groups are above the plane and bromine are shown by dash, that these are below the plane. Now here you can see that there is plane of symmetry, so no mirror image is found for this compound. Now let's interchange the position. Let's move one Br up and one methyl down. then what happens? That if my Br is here and methyl is shown here and these two remain same, again there is a plane of symmetry, and because of this plane of symmetry, you see here we have a plane, here you can put a plane anywhere. So because of the plane of symmetry, both the compounds are a chiral, they do not have their mirror images, and we cannot form any more stereoisomers, because if I try to put 2Br up, then it is the same compound as this one. Okay, so only these two possibilities are there, so we get two isomers for Y. Now my is this one. Here we have an aromatic compound and 1, 3, 5 positions contain methyl groups. Now we are doing bromination and we are doing dibromination. Now if I am doing dibromination, again we have two possibilities, that one Br here, one Br here. Now in above, these two are the geometrical isomers of Y. So these are stereoisomers. Yes, these are stereoisomers. But here, for this compound, we do not get any geometrical isomer, as well as there is no chiral center. It means we do not get any stereoisomer for this compound. Similarly, if I take the other case, when Br are present on individual carbons, then also this compound does not have any geometrical isomer as well as optical isomer. So this does not have any stereoisomer. So stereoisomer from first compound is 2, but from the second compound the number of stereoisomer is 0. So in total I can say that the number of stereoisomers is 2. So we are done with the discussion of open mock test paper 1. Next we will see and discuss open mock test paper 2. I hope you all understand how these questions are solved, and let's see, or just calculate your numbers and see what are the mistakes you are doing in these papers. Thank you.